big hand clamped down on a thin wrist and twisted it hard. The man holding it grinned, ready to throw the smaller one into the dirt. He pulled, he yanked. The small one didn't move an inch. Then the big man was the one flying. His boots left the ground, his back slammed into the mat, and the air rushed out of his lungs in one ugly grunt. 100 soldiers stopped breathing at once. Nobody laughed now. Not one man. The thin man in the glasses just stood there calm, hands loose at his sides. A German shepherd watched from the edge of the mat, ears up, dead silent. The man who got thrown was a Green Beret sergeant. The man who threw him was a martial arts teacher named Bruce Lee. What made a trained killer keep hitting the dirt? So stay with me on this one. Let me take you back to how this whole thing started. It was the summer of 1964. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the biggest, toughest army base in the country and the home of the Green Berets. Now these were not regular soldiers. These were special forces men trained to drop behind enemy lines, to fight in the dark, to kill with their bare hands if they had to. They were the best the army had, and believe me, they knew it. They walked like they knew it. They talked like they knew it. They shook hands like they were testing the bones in yours. And the man who ran the hand-to-hand combat program walked taller than any of them. His name was Sergeant Roy Calloway. He stood 6'2", with a thick neck, a flat-top haircut, and forearms like fence rails. He had fought in Korea. He had broken bones in 3 countries, and for 8 years he had taught young soldiers how to put a man on the ground and keep him there. Nobody at Fort Bragg had ever beaten Roy Calloway on the mat. Nobody had even come close. He liked to say there was no magic in fighting, just size, speed, and meanness. The bigger man wins. The faster man wins. The meaner man wins. Everything else, he said, was a fairy tale you told children to make them feel safe. He had a way of running his classes the young men never forgot. He would pick out the cockiest recruit in the bunch, the one with the loudest mouth, and put him on the mat first. Then he would drop him, hard, once, twice, 3 times, until the kid stopped grinning and started listening. That was Calloway's whole philosophy in one move. Pain teaches, respect comes from the floor up, and every man who came through his program left believing the same simple gospel he did: be the biggest, be the meanest, win. So you can imagine how he felt the morning they told him a civilian was coming to consult, a consultant, on close-quarter combat, for the Green Berets. Calloway laughed out loud when he heard it. Some Army brass had been to a martial arts demonstration out in California, and they had gotten excited about all this kung fu business. Word came down that an expert was being flown in to share a few ideas with the instructors. Calloway figured it would be some old man in pajamas, breaking boards and waving his hands around. He figured he would smile, nod, let the man talk for an hour, then get back to teaching real fighting to real men. He even told a couple of his sergeants the night before, over coffee, "Watch, they're going to send us a magician, and I'm going to make him disappear." Then the car pulled up. Out stepped a young man, slim, maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. He wore a plain shirt, dark slacks, and a pair of glasses. He looked, Calloway thought, like a college student who had taken a wrong turn off the highway. And right behind him jumped a German shepherd, big and lean, with sharp ears and watchful eyes. The dog stuck close to the young man's leg, matching his steps, never pulling on the leash. The young man crouched down, scratched the dog behind the ears, and said something soft to him in a low voice. Then he straightened up and looked around the base like he was right at home. A few soldiers chuckled. One of them muttered, "That's the expert." Another whispered back, "Calloway's gonna eat him alive." The young man's name was Bruce Lee. He was 23 years old. He ran a small martial arts school out west, and he had a way of moving that most people did not notice right away. He did not swagger. He did not puff out his chest. He just walked, smooth and quiet, with his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. His eyes took in everything: the mat, the bleachers, the men sizing him up. He saw all of it, and he did not seem worried by any of it. If anything, he looked a little amused, like a man who had read the last page of a book and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. The dog's name was Bo. Bruce had raised him from a pup, and the two of them went everywhere together. Bruce tied Bo's leash to a metal post near the edge of the mat, knelt down, and told him to stay. Bo lay down with his head on his paws, but his eyes never left his owner. Not once. Calloway walked over, stuck out a hand the size of a dinner plate, and squeezed. Hard. The kind of handshake meant to send a message, the same one he gave the loudmouth recruits before he put them on the floor. Bruce shook it, smiled politely, and did not flinch, did not even seem to notice. Calloway looked down at him with a smirk. "You're the expert," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an insult dressed up as one. "I'm here to share a few things," Bruce said, "if you'll let me." "Oh, I'll let you," Calloway said, and a couple of his men laughed. "We'll see what you've got." Now here's the thing you have to understand. To Calloway, this was already over. In his head, he had already won. He had 100 of his toughest soldiers in those bleachers, and he was about to put on a show. He was going to use this skinny civilian to prove a point. He was going to show his men that all this fancy martial arts talk was nothing but smoke, and he was going to do it the fastest, simplest way he knew. Grab the little man, throw him down in front of everybody, and let the laughter do the rest. Bruce knew exactly what was coming. You could see it in his face. He had been underestimated his whole life. Too small, too young, too foreign. He had heard it all before in a dozen rooms just like this one, from a dozen men just like Calloway. He had walked into gyms where men twice his size laughed before they touched him, and stopped laughing the second they did. He had learned a long time ago that the loudest man in the room is usually the easiest one to teach. He just stood there calm and waited for the sergeant to make his move. Calloway clapped his hands and called the company to order. The men settled in. Boots scraped, voices dropped, and a hush rolled across the bleachers, and the lesson began. "Listen up," Calloway barked, pacing in front of the bleachers. "The Army flew this gentleman in to teach us a thing or two. So before we start, I want to give him a chance to show us something, a real demonstration with a real opponent." He turned slowly, scanning the rows of soldiers, drawing it out. Then he pointed straight at Bruce. "How about it, Professor? You and me. Just a little show for the boys." The bleachers came alive. Men hooted and elbowed each other. This was going to be good. Their sergeant, the man none of them could touch, against this skinny fellow in glasses. There was only one way it could go, and every man in those stands had already pictured it. Bruce did not say anything for a moment. He looked at Calloway. He looked at the 100 faces grinning down at him. Then he glanced over at Bo, tied to the post, and the dog lifted his head. Bruce gave the smallest nod, more to himself than anyone, and slipped off his glasses. He folded them carefully and set them on the grass by the post, next to the dog. Then he stepped onto the mat. "All right," he said quietly, "show me what you do." That was the moment everything changed, though nobody in that crowd knew it yet. Calloway thought he was about to teach a lesson. He was about to receive one instead. "Simple," Calloway said, rolling his thick shoulders. "Out in the field, you grab a man, you control him, you put him down, like this." He reached out and wrapped his huge hand around Bruce's wrist. "I've got your wrist. I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you, and in about 1 second you're going to be eating dirt. Watch close, fellas." He yanked, and nothing happened. Calloway pulled again, harder this time, throwing his weight into it. Bruce's arm did not move. It was not that Bruce was pulling back. That was the strange part. He was not straining at all. His feet were planted, his body loose, and somehow all of Calloway's strength just went nowhere, like it was pouring into a hole in the ground. The sergeant's face went red. His knuckles went white around that thin wrist. He gritted his teeth and hauled with everything he had, and you could hear the breath hiss out between his teeth. Then Bruce turned his hand. Just turned it, a small twist of the wrist, and stepped to the side. Calloway's own pull, all that force he was throwing forward, suddenly had nothing to push against. He stumbled. His balance broke. And before he could catch himself, Bruce guided that big arm down and around, dropped his hips, and the sergeant went over. 6'2" of muscle flipped through the air and crashed flat onto the mat. The sound echoed across the field. For one full second, nobody moved. 100 soldiers sat with their mouths open. The grins were gone. Bo's head was up, ears pointed, watching. And Bruce Lee just stood there, hands at his sides, breathing easy, like he had done nothing more than open a door and let a strong wind walk through it. Calloway lay on his back, blinking up at the sky. He could not understand what had happened. One moment he had the little man's wrist. The next, the ground had come up and hit him. He had not even felt it coming. There was no strain, no struggle, no moment where he could have braced, just the world tipping over. He scrambled to his feet, his face burning, 100 sets of eyes on him. But here is what surprised them. Bruce did not gloat. He did not turn to the bleachers and raise his arms. He reached out a hand to help the sergeant up, and his voice was kind. "You pulled too hard," he said softly. "When a man pulls, you don't fight the pull, you go with it. You let him beat himself." Calloway slapped the hand away and got up on his own, but the anger in his face cooled a little. The men in the bleachers were dead quiet, waiting to see what he would do, and Calloway, to his credit, took a slow breath. He dusted off his fatigues. He nodded just barely, and the corner of his mouth even twitched, like maybe, just maybe, he had learned something. "All right," he said, and his voice was almost calm now. "Lucky move, but I'll give it to you. That was quick." He walked over to the side of the mat where a canteen sat in the grass. He bent down, unscrewed the cap, and took a long drink of water. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He even looked over at Bo and gave a dry little chuckle. "Smart dog you got there," he said. The tension drained out of the field. A few soldiers laughed, easy now, relieved. The show was over. The professor had made his point, the sergeant had taken it like a man, and now they could all get back to training. Calloway capped the canteen and set it down. He rolled his neck loose and easy. It felt finished. It felt over. It was not over, because as Calloway straightened up, his back to the bleachers where his men couldn't see his face, something in his eyes went cold and flat. He had spent 8 years building his name on that mat, 8 years, and he had just been dropped in 3 seconds in front of every man who answered to him. The calm was a mask. Under it, something had snapped. He turned around slow, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Quiet, almost gentle. The kind of quiet that makes the hair on your neck stand up. "Tell you what, Professor," he said, "let's do it for real this time." Now here is where it stopped being a lesson and turned into something else, because Calloway was not asking for a rematch. He had already made up his mind that the first throw was a trick, a cheap parlor move, and he was not going to let a stunt take his name from him. This was not about teaching the men anymore. This was about pride. It was personal now, and a proud man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous kind of man there is. He did not wait for an answer. He came in fast. No handshake, no grabbing of the wrist, no slow setup for the crowd. This time he threw a real punch, a heavy right hand aimed straight at Bruce Lee's jaw, the kind of punch that had ended fights in 3 countries. The men in the bleachers gasped. A couple of them came halfway out of their seats. This was not a demonstration anymore, and they knew it. Bruce slipped it. He moved his head maybe 2 inches, and the fist sailed past his ear so close it stirred his hair. He did not hit back. He just stepped away, light on his feet, and held up an open hand. "Sergeant," he said calmly, "you don't want to do this." "Oh, I think I do," Calloway growled, and he came again. A left hook this time, then a right, fast and hard, combinations he had drilled 10,000 times in front of 10,000 recruits, and every single punch found nothing but air. Bruce flowed around them. He bobbed, he slid, he drifted just out of reach, never rushing, never panicking. To the men watching, it looked like Calloway was fighting a shadow. The sergeant was swinging with everything he had, grunting with the effort, and the little man in the glasses had not thrown a single strike. That was the moment the whole company understood they had been wrong, all of them, wrong about the skinny civilian, wrong about what they were watching. This was not a lucky trick. This was a man who was simply completely better. And worse than that, far worse, was the thing nobody said out loud but everybody felt. If this man wanted to hurt their sergeant, he could have done it 10 times already. He was choosing not to. Let me pause right here for 1 second. If you're enjoying this story so far, if you want to see how it ends, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really does help, and there's a lot more coming. All right, back to the mat. Calloway was breathing hard now. Sweat ran down his face and dripped off his chin. He had been throwing punches for almost a minute and had not landed one. His arms were getting heavy. His men were silent. And the more he missed, the angrier he got, and the angrier he got, the worse his punches became. They got wild. They got sloppy. Bruce could have ended it 10 times over, but he didn't. He kept letting the sergeant come, kept slipping away, almost like he was waiting for the man to wear himself out and see reason on his own. There was no cruelty in it. There was something almost patient about it, the way you wait out a storm. But Calloway did not see reason. He saw red. And a man who can't see is a man who can't be reached. And that's when the second thing happened, the thing that changed everything all over again. Because their commanding officer had walked out onto the field, Captain Daniel Pryor stood at the edge of the mat with his arms crossed, and the whole company stiffened. Backs went straight. Chins came up. Pryor ran the entire training program. He answered to the men in Washington who had flown Bruce Lee out here in the first place. And he had just watched his best hand-to-hand instructor lose his temper and try to take a civilian's head off in front of 100 soldiers. This was no longer about Calloway's pride. This was about the unit, the reputation of the whole program, the kind of thing that ends careers and gets buried in reports, and the Army did not like to be embarrassed. "Sergeant Calloway," Pryor said, and his voice cracked across the field like a whip. "Stand down." Calloway froze, fist still raised, chest heaving. The fury in his eyes flickered. For a second it looked like he might not obey at all. Then he lowered his arm, breathing hard, and for a long moment nobody said anything. You could hear the wind moving across the field. Then the captain walked out onto the mat, and what he did next shocked everyone. He did not chew Calloway out. He turned to Bruce Lee. "Mr. Lee," Pryor said, "I apologize for my sergeant, but now that we've all seen this, I think my men deserve to understand it, not just watch it, understand it." He paused, looking out at the bleachers at all those young faces. These men go places where the other guy is always bigger, always meaner. They need to know this is real. So I'm going to ask you something. Will you teach us? Right now, all of us. Show us what you just did, and tell us why it works. The stakes had changed one more time. It was not a brawl anymore. It was not even a demonstration. It was a test of whether everything these men believed about fighting, everything Calloway had taught them for 8 years, was actually true. And the whole company was about to find out on the record in front of their captain. For the young soldiers it was a curiosity. For Calloway it was his whole life's work on trial. Bruce looked at the sergeant, then at the captain, then at the 100 soldiers leaning forward in the bleachers, and he nodded. "All right," he said, "let's understand it." He waved Calloway back onto the mat. The big man hesitated, jaw tight, his pride screaming at him to walk away. But the captain was watching, and the men were watching, and in the end he came. And this time Bruce did not just slip and dodge. This time he taught. "Watch what he does when he attacks," Bruce said to the crowd, his voice carrying clear across the field. "Throw the punch, Sergeant, slow this time." Calloway threw a slow right hand. Bruce caught it gently and held the position, freezing it in the air for everyone to see. "See his weight? It's all forward, all committed. When you put everything into a strike, you give that energy away. It belongs to me now." He gave the slightest tug, and Calloway lurched forward off balance and had to catch himself with a stumble. The men murmured. A few of them sat up straighter. "I don't beat him with my strength. I have no strength not next to him. Look at him, look at me. I beat him with his own. He brings the power. I just guide it where it wants to go." He had Calloway throw again, full speed this time, and Bruce flowed around it and tapped him lightly on the ribs with 2 fingers. There, and there, and there. Each time an opening the sergeant never saw, a place where a real strike could have landed. It is not about being big. It is not about being strong. It is about being relaxed and being there and not being there all at once. Tension is slow. A tight muscle fights itself before it ever reaches you. Water is soft, and water is fast, and water always finds the way through. Be like water, and the bigger man has nothing to push against. The men were leaning in now, all of them, the way men lean in when they're hearing something true for the first time. Even the ones in the back rows had gone still. Then he showed them the throw, the very throw that had started the whole thing. He had Calloway grab his wrist again, slow this time, and narrated every piece. The turn of the hand, the drop of the hip, the step to the side that turned the big man's strength into a weapon against him. You felt strong because you were pulling. But the moment you pull, you commit. And the moment you commit, you can be moved. Here. He turned his wrist, dropped, and laid Calloway down on the mat as gently as setting down a sleeping child. No slam this time. Just a soft, slow, undeniable lesson in physics. Calloway lay there for a second, looking up at the sky, and something in his face had finally changed. The anger was gone. In its place was something none of his men had ever seen on him before in 8 years. It looked a lot like wonder. "Do it again," Calloway said quietly. "Show me again." And Bruce did. He showed him again and again, slow and patient, until the sergeant began to feel it in his own body. The way the balance broke, the way force could be turned and folded and sent back. Calloway started to nod each time, the way a student nods when the thing finally clicks. Bo watched the whole thing from his post, ears up, tail giving a slow thump against the ground, as if he had seen his owner do this 100 times and knew exactly how it ended. By the time they finished, the sun was dropping low over Fort Bragg, throwing long shadows across the mat, and 100 green berets sat in total silence, because they had just watched everything they thought they knew get turned upside down by a man half their size. The toughest unit on the whole base had learned that strong does not always mean strong, and small does not always mean weak. And not one of them would ever look at a smaller man the same way again. Now you might think the surprise of this story is the throw, or the way Bruce handled the punches, but it isn't. The real surprise is what Roy Calloway did next, because a smaller man had just humiliated him in front of everyone he commanded. And a proud man, a mean man, the kind of man Calloway had always been, would have carried that grudge to his grave. He would have made the rest of that visit miserable. He would have told himself it was all tricks, all luck, and gone right back to teaching size and speed and meanness the very next morning. Calloway did not do that. He got to his feet slow and stood in front of Bruce Lee with his men watching. He looked at him for a long moment. Then this big, hard, proud sergeant who had never backed down from anybody in his life did the hardest thing a man like him can do. He stuck out his hand, not the crushing handshake from before. A real one, open, honest. "I've been teaching it wrong," Calloway said, loud enough for every man in the bleachers to hear. "8 years. I taught these boys that the biggest man wins, and you just showed all of us that's a lie." He shook his head slowly and his voice dropped. "I sent men out of here believing something that could have gotten them killed. I'd be a fool not to learn from you. So if you've got the time, Professor, I'd be honored if you'd teach me. Properly." You could have heard a pin drop. And then the bleachers erupted. The men were on their feet, clapping, stamping, because they had just seen something even rarer than a small man beating a big one. They had seen a proud man admit he was wrong in public with grace. And believe me, in a place like Fort Bragg, that takes more courage than any punch ever thrown. Bruce shook his hand and smiled, a real smile this time. "I'd like that," he said. "But you taught me something too, Sergeant." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "You came back up," Bruce said. "Twice. Most men, you put them down once and they're done. They stay down, they quit in their hearts before their backs even hit the floor. You kept getting up. That's not something I can teach. That's something you already had." He nodded toward the soldiers. "Strength isn't in the arms, it's in that. You've got plenty of it. You were just aiming it wrong." And that right there is the whole story in a single moment. Because the lesson was never really about kung fu or wrists or throws. It was about the difference between strength and force. Force is loud. Force grabs and pulls and swings and tires itself out and falls down. Strength is quiet. Strength stays balanced, stays calm, and knows when to bend so it doesn't break. Calloway had spent his whole life confusing the two, and a 23-year-old in a pair of glasses had set him straight in a single afternoon. Bruce stayed at Fort Bragg for the rest of that week, and every morning the first man on the mat before any of the young soldiers showed up was Sergeant Roy Calloway. He came early in the gray light before reveille. He listened. He asked questions like a beginner, even though he had 20 years on most of the men in his own class. He learned how to relax, how to feel his opponent's balance through his own hands, how to stop fighting force with force. He fell down a lot those mornings, and every time he got back up without a word and tried again. Bit by bit, the meanness went out of his teaching and something better took its place. The men noticed. They always notice. A teacher can't hide what he believes, not from students who watch him every day. And the program changed because of it. Calloway started teaching what Bruce had taught him, that the goal was not to be the strongest man on the field, but the calmest. That a soldier who could stay relaxed under pressure would beat a soldier who panicked every single time. That the man who keeps his head keeps his life. It made them better. And probably, somewhere down the line, in some place none of us will ever know about, it kept some of them alive. On the last day, Bruce packed up his small bag and walked back to the car with Bo trotting at his side. The whole company came out to see him off, lined up along the road without anybody ordering them to. Calloway walked him to the door, and the two men stood there a moment, the giant and the slim young teacher, an unlikely pair if there ever was one. "You know," Calloway said, scratching Bo behind the ears, "when you first stepped out of that car, I figured you for a waste of my time." Bruce laughed. "I know, I could tell." "Yeah, I wasn't real subtle," Calloway smiled, then went quiet for a second, looking out at the field where it had all happened. "I won't forget this, any of it, not as long as I live." "Neither will I," Bruce said, and he meant it. Then he climbed into the car, Bo curling up at his feet, and they drove off down the long road out of Fort Bragg, leaving behind 100 of the toughest men in the United States Army, standing in the late afternoon sun, all of them a little humbler and a little wiser than they had been that morning. And here is the thing I want you to take with you. The day had started with a big hand clamping down on a thin wrist, ready to throw a smaller man into the dirt. It ended with that same big man on his own 2 feet, choosing to learn instead of to fight. The wrist grab was never really the point. The lesson was in what came after. Anybody can throw a punch. Anybody can grab a wrist and squeeze. But it takes a real man to get knocked down twice in front of everyone he leads and stand back up and say out loud, "I was wrong. Teach me." That's the part most people forget when they tell this story. They remember the skinny kid who flipped the giant, but the giant who learned from him. He's the other half of it. The two of them together, that's the whole lesson. One man had the wisdom, the other had the courage to take it, and you need both. So the next time somebody underestimates you because of how you look, or how small you are, or how quiet you are, remember that afternoon at Fort Bragg. Remember that the loudest, strongest man on the field got humbled by the calmest one. And remember that the bravest thing in the whole story was not a throw at all. It was a handshake. Thanks for staying with me all the way to the end. If this story moved you, leave a comment and let me know. And take care of yourself out there.